Hello everyone, and welcome to the final installment of our Term 4 Teaching with GIS series. Thanks again for joining us at such a busy time of the year. The end of the year is in sight for you, and those 6 weeks of quickly approaching holidays never looked better, and I'm sure are very well deserved this year, considering the hoops and hurdles that you've jumped through and over. It's great to see a number of familiar names that I've noticed tuning in from the first webinar of this series. For those that don't know me, my name is Jake Lovejoy and I'm the Education Program Manager for Esri Australia and your host for today's webinar. And I'm very excited for today's webinar presentation, and we'll introduce our speaker, Joseph Kursky, in just a moment. Before I do, just want to remind you very quickly that today's webinar will be recorded and it'll be made available probably early next week to you via both our email and our website. Throughout the webinar presentation, we definitely welcome your questions. You can submit them in the GoToWebinar panel on the right-hand side at any time during the presentation, and we'll go through them at the end of the presentation. We've got about 10 or so minutes for Q&A, so please post them throughout, and we will definitely try and get to all of them at the end. As previously mentioned, today we are joined by Education Manager and Geographer Joseph Kursky, who will be presenting on how we, as teachers and educators, can use GIS to empower and engage students in becoming community change agents. Joseph is one of a brilliant team of education managers for Esri United States, and he supports American schools and universities in their adoption and their use of GIS technologies. However, his knowledge and skill sets extend far beyond this. Joseph holds 3 degrees in geography and has served as a geographer in 4 sectors of society, including government, academia, private industry, and non-for-profit organizations. Notably, Joseph has worked for organizations like the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which is, I guess, America's version of Australia's Bureau of Meteorology. I don't know if you just heard that. I just had a huge thunderclap in the background, so it might get a little bit real over in Brisbane. The US, he's also worked for the US Census Bureau and multiple universities. In addition to this, Joseph regularly contributes to academic journals, authoring over 75 chapters and articles on GIS, education, and other related topics. He's authored over 8 books and has a monthly podcast, which is available on the website linked to on this slide. However, when it all boils down, Joseph, and this is the thing that I love most about Joseph, he really does champion geography and champions teachers and educators, as well as students, in their use and adoption of GIS. This has been overwhelmingly evident in all of my interactions with Joseph, who's extended his hand and made me definitely feel more welcome and comfortable in my own journey with GIS. So it's this combination of experience, knowledge, and a genuine enthusiasm for GIS and education that makes us so fortunate to have Joseph present to present to us today. Sorry, Joseph. Without further ado, I will hand it all over to you.
Oh, many thanks. All right, folks, we are going to, Jake, do you want to have me share the screen again? I want to show the correct monitor.
Currently, I can see the PowerPoint using field data collection, mapping.
We're good then. Folks, yep. Greetings. Good to see you all. As you can see, it's nighttime here in Colorado at about 40 degrees north, 105 degrees west. I'm wearing my map tie just for you all this evening here, 10:30 p.m.-ish. But it's a huge honor. We're all in this together. So yes, as Jake said, very kind words. Jake and I are completely dedicated to helping you be successful with geotechnologies. We just firmly believe that there are greater goals than just learning the tools. And we'll talk about those in a bit, but just at the outset, it's the spatial thinking, it's the critical thinking, working with data, media fluency, communicating about your research, getting students connected with their community and their world, and being change agents, which is exactly our theme for this evening, or the morning for you, but empowering students to be change agents. And Jake and I are sincere. We don't want this just to be, okay, this is a session, live long and prosper, map on and go forth, and we'll never talk to you again. No, we want this to be a dialogue and just one of a series of events that we want to engage with you all on. So that all said, please let's continue the conversation after this session, because in part, this session is going to be a very brief snippet, a bite-sized, gluten-free nugget of geospatial technology, if you know what I mean. So you're not going to memorize all of these things. And sure, we'll share resources about how to dig deeper into all these tools, but this is really intended to be so that you can understand the general workflow of connecting 4 of these tools in this web GIS platform that you all have access to. That is the idea, not to memorize every single step. Once you understand the workflow, then okay, now I want to make a survey. Now I want to make one of those story maps. Now I want to make one of those dashboards that Joseph and Jake were talking with me about. Now, here's a little geographic quiz for you. Where did I take this picture? We have a chat box here, don't we? Well, while you're thinking about that, here's a couple of the reasons why I just feel very passionate, and I know you folks do in the geography, enviro, education area, about the need for getting students out there on the landscape, collecting data, connecting with real issues in their community, in their region, in their state, in their world. And then also, as you see here, developing these skills that we'll talk about tonight, but also keeping in mind the greater goals of spatial and critical thinking and empowering students to be change agents. So you probably know where this is, correct? It is the 12 Apostles Rocks in Victoria. So I was down there. I've been there twice now to Australia, and I love it every time. And hopefully you'll say to Jake, hey, invite Joseph back down here. Hopefully I didn't burn my bridges last time. Now, not to get too geo-geeky in the weeds, but I think it's important to understand how this all fits. And now I just ask you to put your educator hat on, not that you ever really take it off, but let's just chat about how you would introduce this to students. One way is the geotechnology approach way. And the way I like to do it, and this isn't the only way, and you can modify this, but think about this for a moment. Students already use cloud-based tools, right? They've got their music. They've got a lot of music that's on their local device, but increasingly they've got music that's sitting up in Pandora or Spotify or Amazon Music or Apple Music or some place like that, right? Why? So they can access ABBA's greatest hits anytime, anywhere, on any device. Yeah, ABBA was a band. Anyway, the point is they've got stuff up in the cloud. Ditto for their documents, right? You don't just have local documents anymore. Sure, you've got some that are local. You've got some spreadsheets, some word process documents, some PowerPoints, etc. But you increasingly have things in the cloud, right? Why? Because you want to access it anywhere, any device, anytime. And I just submit to you all this evening, morning for you, but that it is even more important that we have this web GIS paradigm. Why? Because all the issues that we have been thinking about as geography educators and as science educators and other disciplines probably represented for this session today, the issues that you want students to understand, climate, water, energy, health, natural hazards, etc., they transcend disciplinary boundaries, correct? They're not just economics, they're not just business, they're not just geography, they're not just environmental science. They're multiple disciplines. And secondly, they don't stop at political borders, right? They're not just Australia, they're not just the USA, they're not just Asia. They transcend political borders, and they also transcend physical borders, like watersheds. They're not just one watershed or one ecoregion, right? So it's really wonderful that we have this web GIS paradigm at our fingertips, manifested in tools like Arcgis Online that we're going to take advantage of this session, okay? And so having that said, when Jake and I used to do these teacher professional development events, it was in the days of desktop-only GIS, and an educator would get done with that and say, "Oh, I've got to install software now, and I've got to work with my IT staff." And okay, you know, so there was some tech barriers to implementation, understandably. But now, hey, do you have a web browser? Do you have a tablet? Do you have a laptop? You're good to go. Do you have a phone? You know, as long as you've got a web connection, you're good to go with this. So I just wanted to mention that whole way of approaching this with students. They're already using web-based tools, and this is no different. They're running it in a web browser. And the apps are really opening up doors, not just in education, but just think in industry and nonprofits and government agencies, higher education as well. They're opening doors to non-GIS, non-geo people using some of these things with some of the tools that we're going to use in our session today. And the tools that we're going to use, the apps that we're going to engage in, are not every single one of these. Let's say you've got drone data that you've flown. Well, we got a tool for that. We've got an app for that, Drone to Map. So there's a variety of things that do different things. The ones we're going to focus on are our dashboards, which is on the right-hand side of the top row, and then we're going to focus on Survey 123, which is in the middle of the second row, and we're also going to focus on StoryMaps. So we're just going to highlight a few of these, and our workflow is going to be as follows. We're going to collect data, and we're going to map it, and then we're going to analyze it, and we're going to create a dashboard, and then we're going to create a story map that kind of stitches them all together. Let me show you an example. And again, with your educator hats on, this might be one way you can actually model this for your students. Everybody on the planet with a computer has seen the JHU coronavirus dashboard, and there are a variety of flavors of this, right, at different agencies around the world. The reason why these dashboards exist is because people want them. They want the data now, and they want it to be able to plan their behavior today or their community's policies, et cetera. So these dashboards were created because of WebGIS. They would not have been able to be created in such rapid fashion and deployed in the old clunky days of desktop-only geographic information systems. There's just no way they could have done that. So this dashboard is the same tool that you have at your fingertips as an educator. Okay, this dashboard has a variety of feeds coming in, but just like the dashboard in your car, you get a lot of information in a short amount of space, right? The dashboard in your cars, you got the fuel, you got the odometer reading, et cetera. Here, you've got obviously data feeds. Sadly, this is the most popular dashboard that has ever been created because of the health situation that we're all in. This is my own created story map about an issue that I care about. So I am, again, with your educator hat on, think about, okay, what issues do you care about, and what is an issue in your community? What issues might your students care about that you could construct a project around? In my case, my example today in our session is about walkability. So here's my story map. It's a web-based interactive map with text, images, videos, etc. And you have access to creating story maps, perhaps some of you have. And so Jake and I will share, how do you create one of these things? All of that coming. But for now, we just ask you to kind of, okay, I understand how these pieces fit together, and I'm confident that I'm going to be able to do this. So I just have some text, a fairly simple story map about what is walkability, why does it matter, why do communities care about it? Inside my story map, you see this oval button, and that is, if I click there, it is a link to my survey. In this case, it's called Survey 123, which is a tool that Esri Australia has developed so that you and others can actually deploy a survey. You can crowdsource it also, so the people at the other end collecting data into your survey, they don't have to be members of your Arcgis Online organization. They don't even have to know anything about GIS. All they have to have is a phone, and they don't even have to have it connected to the web. You can take these things offline, which is another thing we can talk about if we have time. So in my survey, I've got, hey, pedestrian friendly or unfriendly? Okay, tick the box, rate it. Is it, got a little Likert scale here, and then describe it. Wide path or sidewalk, branches or snow in the way, dangerous cross traffic. Describe the site. Where is it? And then do you have a photo? So it's a fairly simple survey, but creating this, as you'll see in a moment, is very much analogous to SurveyMonkey or Google Forms, where you're just literally dragging and dropping things onto a form and you're creating this. Now, the slightly geo-geeky thing here is that it becomes an editable service, a feature service, a mapped layer. It's kind of like the Lego bricks. If you've got these Lego bricks, you can combine them into different structures, right? Same thing here. You can combine these surveys into different, and these features that come out of the survey, in this case, point data, into different maps, okay? So you can mix and match. Yeah, that's pretty powerful, as we'll see in a moment. So this is a survey, Survey 123. It's part of this platform that we talked about earlier, Arcgis Online, that you have access to. And then the other thing I wanted to show you was underneath the survey, again, this is back on my story map, I have the results, the live feed coming in from the survey, okay? So, I was down there over in your beautiful part of the world not too long ago. So here I've got a couple of points that I and others collected into the survey. And this is probably a place that many of you will recognize. It's right across from the Opera House. Very walkable, friendly place to be. So before work one day, I strolled down there and took a few photos and filled out my own survey. And other people have filled out my survey. You can fill out my survey because it is completely open right now until I, the owner of the survey, turn it off. Okay, so you have that power and control while you're collecting data into your survey. So as you can see, I've got points, and underneath the live interactive web map, I have another copy of that web map in here with a fun base map. So you can choose a variety of base maps, but then I have the results. So this is the dashboard. I have the results of my survey. Roughly 1/3 of the points that have been collected thus far in my survey are pedestrian unfriendly and 2/3 are friendly. And you can see here on this pie chart is the result of that other question that you saw in my survey: branches, snow, wide path or sidewalk, dangerous cross traffic, etc. I've got a little legend on this dashboard, and I also have a gauge. Right now I've got 424 points in my survey, okay, as of this moment. A little survey, a key there, and that's it. This dashboard took me about an hour to create. Okay, so we're not talking days, weeks, months here to create these elements. Sure, this dashboard, and this is kind of a neat story if there is anything neat that comes out of this, but one of the stories that you can actually convey to the students is that a graduate student actually created this with some guidance from that graduate student's professor. But the point is, you can do some great things while you're still a student, and so can your students. So sure, this took several days, and it because of the number of hits on this particular dashboard, there was a lot of back-end support that had to be done, making sure that the bandwidth would hold and so on and so forth. This dashboard took me an hour. The map took me about 45 minutes to create. The survey took me about 45 minutes to create. So all told, the whole thing, and the story map took me about 30 minutes. So I completed the whole thing in an afternoon. Again, a couple class periods. Yep. Okay. So what we're going to do is I'm going to demonstrate how to build one of these things. And so inside Arcgis Online, there are different tools, as you may be familiar with, especially if you hang around with Jake long. He'll introduce you to other tools, and perhaps you know some of these things. But I think the power, and that comes back to today's session, the power here is that you're connecting these different elements, okay? And this is the link to, and I'll put these things in the chat box. You're connecting these different elements inside this platform for a purpose, okay? You're not just using these by themselves. And another thing that I think is valuable about this platform is that there are many tools that you as an educator have, that you want to use, right? And some of them are just one-off things that you just use by themselves. So for example, I've got, and you probably do too, you've got your favorite tools for editing photos, touching up photos. I've got one that I've used for many, many years now that's like 500K in size. It only does one thing. It basically edits photos, but it's a one-off. It was from a developer in Germany, created the program, free, I use it. The power here is that these elements, dashboards, story maps, and other things, there are other ways to make multimedia maps. But the advantage here is that they're connected to this platform. So you're not stuck with using some tool that someone invented in their garage, which may be good, right? There's good things that come out of those kinds of homegrown things. But what if it's gone next year or next semester when you want to teach with this? No, the advantage here is that you've got a robust system there's something like 1 billion maps in ArcGIS Online that are served per day. I mean, transportation systems, CSIRO in Australia, major science agencies are depending on this system. So it's not going to disappear at all, and it's supported. It's a very vast backbone of, it's the part of the Amazon and Microsoft Azure cloud. So there's a whole array of servers behind this all over the world. So that's good for you as an educator. You want to be able to count on using a tool. So Survey 123, as the name implies, it's a 1-2-3 process. You're collecting data into a form, and you can do some branching. If a person answers this, go to this question. If the person answers that way, go to this question, etc. So you've got some intelligence built in. And the way that this came about actually was through another health crisis. It actually came around through the Ebola crisis. And so The World Health Organization came to Esri and said, hey, we've got this tool called Collector. You folks at Esri have this tool called Collector, and it's map-based. And we were like, well, we love maps. What's not to love? Well, it's too complicated for our people in the field. We need something form-based so they can go collect these Ebola sites in West Africa. And so we said, okay, we'll create this thing called Survey 123. So that's where it came around. That's how it started. And I think it has great utility for educators because of all the things that we talked about. Ease of use, students can create these, they can fill them out, they can engage in their community issues and so on and so forth. There are some components of Survey 123. You've got a way of analyzing data once you collect it in Survey, as I'll demonstrate here in a bit. You've got reporting tools. You've got managing your surveys. Let's say you create several of them, and you want to be able to update them and maintain them or delete them as you need to, okay? So you've got graphs and maps, of course, as you would expect. You can also download the data and analyze it in Excel or bring it into a statistical package, et cetera, et cetera. But the exciting thing, I think, for us as educators is that you can crowdsource these surveys. You can citizen science enable them just with a simple checkbox, as I'll demonstrate here in a moment. There's two ways to create one of these things. You can use the Excel method, so you actually get bounced into the Excel spreadsheet and you create it there. Or you can drag and drop from a web form, which I'm going to use today, because I think it's a lot easier and it doesn't give you quite as much power as the Excel method, but it's still quite powerful, as you'll see, okay? So if we go into Arcgis Online, if you go into Arcgis Online and log in with your school account, if you don't know how to get a school account, talk to Jake. He'll set you up. But it's free, and you've got access to all these tools through your school account. And so once you do that, and you're in survey123.arcgis.com, you'll see probably a blank page because you won't have any surveys unless you've already created one in the past. And you just go up to New Survey here, and this is the sheet that you just saw me demonstrate in the slide, where I'm going to use the web designer. I'm going to start on the left side here, and I'm going to say, hey, this is going to be a walkability for the Esri conference, okay? And that way I'll know later on when I look at all these, which one I created and when. I'm kind of giving short shrift to this metadata section, but when you're actually doing this, it's important to be kind of thoughtful about creating these with meaningful names and so on, especially good lessons for your students, right? When they don't want to call everything, 4 November, 5 November, because in December, what's what? They won't know what they refer to. And now you just have that experience where you're dragging and dropping things. So I'm going to, okay, I want a multiple choice. I'm going to drag it over here. And I'm going to say, well, yeah, this is going to be, let's go ahead and, how about, we've got a Likert scale. We've got a variety of things. So this is one of the things that I was indicating before. If I don't like these choices, I'm going to say, not walkable, fairly walkable, neutral, walkable, excellent for pedestrians, or something on that. Okay, so I'm going to save that. Now I've got a question in there. Okay, now I'm not going to go through every single element in my survey, but I think you get the idea that if all I have to do, and I don't want untitled question, is this, how walkable is this location? Okay, that makes sense. Save. Okay, good. Now, the reason why I'm not going to go through every single element is because I think once you understand the basic workflow, I don't need to go through every single piece, and we don't have time to do it anyway. But hopefully you're getting an idea of, oh, all I have to do is add, and then I choose what I want to add over to the left side. So the thing that probably you're wondering about is, how do I get that map in there? Well, it's just as simple as, okay, I'm going to add a map, and then what kind of data do I want to collect? This is where, your pre-planning makes a lot of difference, right? You don't just walk out into the field and collect data, right? You always talk to the students about what units are we going to use, what instruments are we going to use, we're going to practice good safety, watch for cross traffic, et cetera, et cetera. So here, I'm kind of, again, giving, a light touch to that, but you're going to have those meaningful conversations with your students. In this case, I want to collect point data for the point that I'm collecting on the walkability. If I'm collecting perimeters of lakes or ponds, or wetlands or urban renewal districts or something, maybe I'm going to want an area, or if I'm collecting fence lines or something else, I'm going to want a line. But I want points in this case. So I'm going to say, well, where is this location? Okay, it's pretty straightforward. And do I want this to be a required question? Ooh, yes. So I'm going to scroll down and say, this is a required question. I really want to know where that is. Okay. And then here I can say, well, you know what? I want to have RMIT campus. How about that? Is that searchable and doable? Let's see. There we go. Yeah, so here's where I was last year. So let's say I'm going to have the students, they're at a school near the university campus, and I'm going to have them collect walkability in and around that campus. Okay, so when they pull up the survey, they don't have to search the whole globe, right? It's going to be focused on your community or wherever you're collecting data. You can also say, you know what, I want to have imagery because I want the students to recognize, some of these landmarks. And so I'm going to zoom in just a little bit here, and maybe I'm going to scroll over to this park. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, excellent. So that's where it's going to be when I create the survey. One more thing, what about add? And what if I want an image? I want them to collect a photo and put that in there. Okay, do you have an image? Great, save. Now, here's a couple of other things. If I'm going to preview this, so I'm going to know what it looks like when I'm out in the field or just on a web browser. Make sure it all looks good, everything's spelled correctly, and so on and so forth. And actually, right now, that's looking pretty good. I've got my 3 questions in there at the moment, and so I'm going to say, I want to show you a couple of other things here. And one of the things is you're going to have a data tab. I don't have any points in the survey yet, right? I just created it. And also in here, I've got to publish the survey first. So I'm going to go back into design and I'm going to publish this survey. And then do you want to publish it? Yes, I do. I'm not going to go into how to change the colors, add your school logo. You know that there's appearance, right? That you can change all that stuff and make it look really nice. But I'm going to skip all that because that'll be fun for you to play with and your students. So the thing I wanted to show you though is that collaborate zone, because that's pretty important. You got to decide, how am I going to share this and who do I want to share it with? So over here under collaborate, this is where you can set it so that you, number one, do you want it to just open in the browser on their phone? Or do you want to actually have them have the Survey123 app, which gives you a little more power and flexibility if you have the app? Or do you want to give them a choice? But even more importantly, who can submit data to it? Do you want to open it up to the whole world? Probably not if it's a project with your students. You're probably going to want to create a group with 10 students or 20 students. That's your geography, year 7s or whoever it is. That's what you're going to do. You're going to create a group, and then you're just going to share the survey with that group is probably what you're going to do. In your case, your organization is going to be your school. In my case, it's the Denver regional office. And so that's really all I wanted to show you in that zone. Okay, now once you've got the survey created, then you can start collecting data into it. You're going to be able to get a link, as you can see right here, and you can share that short link with your students and with others that you want to collect data into. So once you're done with that, it's going to create this thing called the Editable Map Feature Service. It's basically a layer that contains the points that you've got in your survey. And let me show you an example of one of those. Right now here, I've got this thing right here. What is the walkability of this location? Now, this is the one that I showed you earlier where I actually have 400 and some odd points inside there. And you can see this is how it's going to look. And again, you're going to want to spend a little time populating the metadata in here, describing what it is so you can come back to it later and you'll know what it is. But the important thing for our discussion right now is I want to open it in the map viewer. That's going to open it up so you can see this in this seamless interface, right? So you see the points that have been collected into the survey, and you can symbolize this however you want. For example, if you said, you know what, I want to be able to say pedestrian friendly or unfriendly. I don't want to have every single point be orange. I want friendly or unfriendly. Okay, and now I've got some options. If I don't like those default symbols, I can change it. But I'm, in the interest of time, I'm just going to say, yes, that's good. And now I've got friendly, unfriendly, basically. Okay, so I'm liking that. Now I'm going to go ahead and save this map. So I'm going to go ahead and save as, and I'm going to call it the Walkability Map. Okay. And I'm also going to give it the Esri tag. Okay. And also put it in the title. That way I can know, I'm gonna be able to distinguish it from my other maps that I've got in there. Okay, so far so good. I've created a map. It's got one layer in it, my survey, and it has a base map. Now, the power of the platform, of course, is that you've got the ability now, let's say you're collecting data on, I don't know, weather or water quality or something. You can add ecoregions of Australia. You can add land cover. You can add mean annual precipitation, all kinds of things, land use. Yeah, so you've got the ability to add just with this add button on the left side. Nice. Okay, so more to the point of what we're talking about now. Okay, I want to now create a dashboard that we talked about earlier. Okay, if I go under share here, which is right next to the save button, by the way, this interface, keep your knees bent. Okay, like other tools that you use, it evolves, and we have a new map viewer coming out that's going to have a couple buttons on the right side as well as on the left side. So don't get too locked into where these buttons have to be. As long as you know, hey, somewhere there's going to be a save button, and somewhere there's going to be a share button. So don't get too attached to the tools. Tools change every time the tools evolve. It gets easier to use and more powerful. So that's good. Okay, so who can view this map? Again, this is where you have to make some choices. Who do you want to be able to see this? Probably in your case, it'll be either your school or a group in your school. But under here is there's a create a web app, a web mapping application. Remember that big list I showed of all the tools? Well, all the web apps at the beginning of our session today. Well, as you can see right here, I can create a story map right here. I'm not going to right now, but I'm going to create a dashboard. See, it says that there's a tab that says dashboards. Oh, okay. And I'm going to call it dashboard. I know that's a little bit redundant because it is a dashboard, but I like to put that in the title. Just I'm a bit old school that way on my naming conventions. But okay, so I've got that. And good. Now we're going to be in the creation mode for the dashboard. And just like the survey, it's a matter of dragging and dropping things. There's no coding required. Now, sure, if you want to dig a little deeper, we've got, all this is actually driven with Python and JavaScript. So, your computer science students and your computer science colleagues, they might want to dig into this a little bit deeper in terms of that. And we've got tools to do that as well. But these are just configurable apps that you're dragging and dropping and configuring yourself. So again, plus sign. Hey, I want a gauge. Okay, great. And I've got my feature layer right there. What's the walkability of this location? There is a gauge. That looks good to me. Done. Now I've got a gauge. It's pretty big, isn't it? It's kind of big and offensive. So let's make it a little smaller. You see, I'm just dragging things. Well, what if we added a pie chart? Okay, again, picking that layer, and I'm going to go ahead to look at the features. What do I have here? Pedestrian friendly or unfriendly, got the rate of the walkability. I don't want that in a pie chart, but friendly or unfriendly. Okay, what about this? I also have tick all the choices, rate the walkability. Oh, yeah, I've got that too. Very nice. So I've got these things in here, and I'm going to go and just, in the interest of time, probably not walkability and fields. I've got some choices in here. But anyway, the point is, if I don't like this, I can move it around, right? So I can say, I want that above the map. Oops, I didn't do that quite right. I'm going to drag it up here. Okay, now my gauge is above the map. So I'm not spending tons of time on this, but I think you get the idea that if I just hit this plus sign, I can add a legend, I can add an image, and eventually, in the tutorial that I'm going to share at the end here, eventually you're going to get to the point where it's going to look like this. It's it's going to look like this. You're going to have a couple pie charts, you're going to have a gauge, you're going to have an image and a map legend, and then the map in your dashboard. So that's what the tutorial actually walks you through. But you can see that, okay, you're basically adding and you're then dragging it to where you want it. So last but not least here, we got about 5 minutes here, I think. Yep. Okay, very good. Maybe 10. We've got our survey made. We've got a map made. We've got a dashboard, at least started. All those things started. What about the story map? Okay, so inside our ArcGIS Online session, we have a grid of basically the application launcher is what it is. You can create all these from this 3x3 grid of stuff, including the survey, including the dashboard. You don't have to use the flow that I used earlier. I think it's easy to just say share and then do it from there. But you could have also gone to dashboards right here. There's a couple ways to do most everything inside this platform. But let's say we want to go to StoryMaps. StoryMaps are, they came around in about 2010, so they've been around about a decade now. There are over 1.25 million story maps in existence. I think as an educator, there are two main ways to teach with these. You can teach with existing story maps. So for example, there is a hot numbers story map that came out about a week ago, and I've used it a couple times already. And this is an example of, okay, existing story map. I deem that it's worthy for me to teach with as a teaching tool. And so this one's about climate, and it's got some graphs, some very compelling images in there. You can see for yourself. So this is an instructional content tool, teaching with existing story maps. The second way to use these in the classroom is to create them and have your students create them as a way of communicating a variety of things. The lesson that you just taught on, I don't know, tsunamis of the Pacific, or the walkability of their neighborhood, or water quality, or extreme temperatures in Australia, or whatever the topic is, they can create a story map that explains the results of their research. Now, I use Prezi and PowerPoint and a variety of other presentation tools as well, but I also use story maps increasingly to present my own content. So that's the two main ways of using these. Use existing ones as content resources, and then also create your own and have your students create theirs. They don't have to be very complicated. This obviously is a very long story map, and so there's lots of richness in here, but it doesn't have to be that. And I would just argue that it should actually be pretty simple. Story maps are meant to convey a single idea or a few ideas. They're not meant to be your master's thesis, okay? So if we go to story maps, okay, great. Just like Survey 123, you see a sort of a zone where you remember how we saw all my surveys? Well, here we're seeing all my story maps, and you'll see all your story maps that you created. But just like dashboards and just like Survey 123, we're going to say new story, start from scratch. And here, I'm going to be able to drag and drop and add content. So I'm going to call this How Walkable is Your Community. Okay, great. Add cover image. So I think you're probably already getting the idea. Oh, okay, I get that, Joseph. You're adding elements, and there's no coding required. You're moving things into this story map, and then as the other tools walked you through, as I indicated, you're going to decide at some point who's going to be allowed to see this. Just you showing it with a projector for your students, or in Zoom or something like that, or do you share it with a group of students that are in your class, or do you share it with your whole school, etc.? Or, hey, this is a rigorous study my students did on dangerous intersections in my community, or different tree species in my community, or something like that. Maybe I make a presentation to the city council or somebody. Maybe in that case, I do share it with everyone. It's up to you. You have the power. So I've got my image in there. I've got a piece of text. Great. Let's dig deeper. What about a map? Yeah, we're all about maps, right, folks? Here's my walkability map. It shows up because it's the same account in my ArcGIS Online organization. So I'm going to go ahead and add that map. Again, you don't even have to get like an embed code. All you have to do is say, okay, point to that map. Now here, if I wanted to edit this, I could actually go to the lower left and start editing this. I could change the classification method, add some layers, land use, land cover, ocean currents, etc., like I was indicating earlier. But in the interest of time, I'm just going to leave it like that and place map. And now I've got the beginnings of my story map that's going to talk a person through with me narrating. So you're developing those oral skills with your students, why walkability matters. And so this one could be just focused on your community, right? It doesn't have to be global. Okay, so I've got the beginnings of that. Same thing with other elements. So if you've got, for example, a video link, you can add that in right here. I think I'm going to abort doing that. But the point is, you can do that. You can add these elements just like this with increasing functionality over time. And what I mean by that is that you've got these immersive elements that might be really engaging. And we won't have time to do that right now. But the idea is play around with these. The students will be very engaged in them, and they're going to be focused on explaining the results of their project. Again, if it's something you assigned or a field-based project, either way. Okay, let's go back to where we left off here. This is a little review of what we did. We created the survey. We then put it into a map. We could click on it on each individual point and get the results. This is a GIS. They're not just a bunch of graphics floating around in cyberspace. So every one of them has a G component, which is the map, and it has an I component, which is the information behind the point, line, or polygon, or grid, or image in that map. So in this case, I've got my tree vegetation survey, survey 123 once again, and I've got a couple of questions in there. Deciduous or evergreen, condition, height in meters, species, and you have a photo. Okay, so in the lesson that I'm going to share, it walks you through every single component that we just went over in 40 minutes time in a longer, more, instead of just being bite-sized and gluten-free, it's going to be a regular meal, but not too heavy, okay? Not too many calories. It's going to be light because these tools are light, and that's the power of them. So you created the survey. We added some things into it. We created the map. Let me just focus on this just for a tiny moment here. The end goal is not to put points, lines, and polygons on maps. Oftentimes, good people say, hey, Joseph, I got my data on the map. Cool, I'll say. And, right? The goal is a higher goal than mapping. Mapping is a step, is an enabler to help you understand the issue better in a deeper way, right? Nothing against that component, but you probably didn't expect me to say that. But I love maps. I'm a geographer. I'm one of you. Hey, forget about it. But don't stop there. Keep going, right? You want to understand it, and that's why we have these analytical tools inside Arcgis Online, which we could talk about at a future workshop, or you could talk to Jake about, hey, I want to do statistically significant hotspots of a certain phenomenon that I care about, or I'm going to create a weighted mean center of all my points. Where's the weighted mean center of all of the litter that I collect? Well, it's Australia. There's no litter. Of the tree species that I created, okay, or the traffic, or the pedestrian counts that I counted, or whatever it is. So we have those analytical tools, and they're inside ArcGIS Online, as you probably noticed earlier. So when I went to the map viewer up in here, I said, ooh, open in map viewer. You have enrichment, overlay, proximity. Oh, I want to know all of the area that's within 100 meters of my school, or within 100 kilometers of the coastline in England, or wherever. So you're using these analysis tools to deepen the understanding. There's not that many of them in there. There's about 40, okay? There's not that many, but they're very powerful, and they, again, lift this up from just being a mapping tool to a geographic information systems tool. So I wanted to mention that and make sure that you don't breeze by that step. Then we created the dashboard. And this is an example of another dashboard that we could create on the same theme. And then finally, we created a story map that kind of stitches them all together. It includes your survey, it includes your dashboard, it includes your web map, okay? And these are pieces of text that you can include. This is the video that I didn't have time to show. It's me walking on an off-ramp, not a very walkable place. But the point is, folks, that you're connecting these tools because they're all part of the platform that you have at your fingertips. Now, there are ways to embed these things into elements, as you saw. So for example, someone at the Port of Tacoma created a survey and they embedded it in a story map. That's all fine, but sometimes we get people that are embedding maps inside of a survey, inside of a map, inside of a dashboard. You know what I mean? There's like, you're reaching quickly the cognitive end of your users. Remember to keep these pretty simple. Just because you can do something in a GIS doesn't mean you always should. So I just wanted to mention that. And here's that lesson that I promised that walks you through exactly how to create all of these. Inside the lesson, I have a zip file with all the images that you need as well. So you don't have to go mining the internet for all these things. I actually have it all contained because I think it's important for people to go through, educators and students, to go through a common successful experience rather than just say, okay, go make a story map on whatever topic. And where are the images? What, I don't even know what I'm 12 years old. I don't even know what I'm interested in. You know, so you guide them through a common success, and then, okay, now that we've all done that and we understand how to do it, then now how do you customize? Okay, folks, that is, I realize, a brief introduction to a variety of tools: StoryMaps, Arcgis Online, so the mapping engine behind it all, dashboards, which remember are the little ideally one screen. You probably noticed this coronavirus dashboard. It has tabs at the bottom. Okay, I mean, these are some grim stats for sure, but it has tabs at the bottom where you can actually toggle between pages. But again, keep it pretty simple. Ideally, it would all fit on one computer screen. I mean, this one, you know, there is a little bit of scrolling where you can get the sources of the information, but ideally one screen. But this lesson actually has, I'll just show you, the zip file with everything that you need in it, okay? And this is part of GeoNet, which is okay, it's a little geeky, but it is a community of GIS users. And the zone that Jake and I hang out in is the education zone. And so I've got a lot of the content that I create they're just sitting up in GeoNet so that you can find it and use it. So here's the lesson on exactly what we walked through today with this zip file of every single thing that you need. And the zip file isn't that big. So that is what I wanted to share with you all. One last thing though, and that is I'm really keen on having students be critical of data. And those of you that were with me last year in the sessions that we conducted together down in Melbourne at the GTAV conference and then afterwards, you probably knew I was going to say this, but because it's so easy in ArcGIS Online to do the following. Hey, I've got this. I'm going to add data. I'm going to search for data. I'm going to look at cyclones or ocean currents, or I'm looking in my content, cyclones or ocean currents. And I've got all kinds of stuff at my fingertips. Oh my gosh, look at this. So what's happening right now? Oh, just to the north of you, look, etc. Because it's so easy to add things, demographics, natural hazards, health issues, I really want the students to understand, can I trust that data? How often was it updated? Who updated it? Why was it updated? What scale was it created at? Does it have sufficient attributes in the table that I can use? So I really want them to be critical of data, just in general on the web. I don't just believe it because it's online, and especially maps. Maps have this air of authenticity, and I really want students to understand, you know, that they're very powerful, and they're also, students are now data creators. They're not just data consumers, especially with these mapping tools that they have at their fingertips. But to that end, I have, this is slightly geeky, but I do have this data blog called Spatial Reserves that might be nice paragraphs and examples that you can share with your students from time to time. So I update this every week, and this week I have everyday examples of being critical of data. I like to put a couple of fun things in because admittedly, data quality on maps, it sounds kind of boring, right? It sounds a little dry. And so here I've got, hey, George Mason University, simple Chinese fast food chain. I didn't know that. I thought it was a major university campus. Why does it say simple Chinese fast food chain? How about this one? You guys will love this. Ooh, orientation matters. I found this in a catalog. What about this one? I know it gets hot in Texas. It gets hot in Australia, but look at this. This is really hot, really wet, and really windy. And this data feed from the Internet of Things was online for about a year. And I finally took a screenshot because I thought someone's going to fix this at some point. And sure enough, they did. But be critical of data. Finally, hey, what's not to love about the Fab Four? But these playlists are playlists, and this one is laden with typos. I thought I was a pretty big Fab Four fan, but I've never heard of the song "A Day in the Sky." What is that? That's not even a song. Penny Lance? Penny Lance is in my ear. What is that? Anyway, the point is be critical of data, especially map data, and that's what this spatial reserves blog is all about. Okay, that said, I've got a couple of other things that Jake and his colleagues have graciously put up there that you can read. The webinar that we're in right now is in here. A couple of things of thinking spatially and progress of GIS in education. So feel free to tap into those as well. But folks, questions, comments, issues? I hope that was engaging and something, hey, I actually might be able to use this. And that's where Jake and I come in. We want to, I never did turn off my webcam, Jake, sorry. No worries. We want to be here, long term. We're in this for the long haul, folks. And so if we can be of any assistance now and also going forward, let us know.
Awesome. Thanks, Joseph. I can definitely see, and I'm sure that most teachers are in the same boat, our knowledge of the Australian curriculum is going, oh, this sounds perfect for Year 7 geography, place and livability. And from my experience as a teacher, teaching Year 7, our assessment was looking at the environmental and social livability of the school. So there's no reason that you couldn't be creating a survey for that assessment piece and yeah, mapping that social and environmental data that you want to collect with your students to identify what's good, what's not so good, and what could be improved possibly in the livability of that school. So definitely super relevant to the curriculum too. Joseph, if you don't mind, there are a couple of questions that have come through that I can just start swinging your way.
Great.
Awesome.
Thanks for being here, folks.
All right, first one from Matthew. This was when I believe you were showing when you were styling your data, you were selecting your drawing tool and your attribute in Arcgis Online. How did Arcgis Online decipher whether your data was walkable or not walkable? So how did it know to make the symbols blue or red?
Yep. Good question. All of those things are driven by good planning and the survey elements that you set up. So, for example, if you want to be able to create a map at some point that has, and this is a good teachable moment with students, if you want to be able to create a map that has graduated symbols, in other words, larger for bigger or taller trees or whatever it is, or noisier if you're creating, a noise map of your community, and you've got some sensors that detect noise levels, you want to have that as a number, right? Which makes sense, but when you're creating it, you need to have strictly a number in there. You can't have 5 meters or 50 decibels, or you can't have alphanumerics because it's just a GIS. It doesn't know that if you mix letters and numbers that if you truly want it to be numbers only, you have to just have numbers in that field. So in the case of the question you're asking about, is it walkable or not? That was just a simple walkable or not walkable. So it's just a binary, and it just says, okay, I've got two possibilities there, and I'm going to choose red for one and blue for another. And if you don't like those symbols or colors, you can override them. So in that case, it's obviously alphanumerics. That, and it's another nice teachable moment there is, the whole nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio concepts from math that we try to integrate into instruction. This is a nice way of doing that. So in that case, of course, it's just nominal data. It's just letters. And so I've got 2 categories and 2 possibilities only. So it came from the survey, and that's how the map knows, because it gets stored in a table, to symbolize them one way or the other.
Mm-hmm. I should just mention really quickly, if you do still have a question and you haven't asked it, you can submit it via the GoToWebinar panel, which is on the screen right now. I'm just going to flick back over. The next question is from Brett, who you do know.
Hey, Brett.
Are high
Awesome.
schools and universities in the USA, are they are their teachers and their students using StoryMaps for senior assessment in US schools? And do you know of any roadblocks that might exist with regards to that in senior assessment?
Not as much as I'd like to, Brett. There are definitely some shining moments. If you look at the StoryMaps competition, there are some that are actually assessments that I would classify as assessments. The challenge, though, is that I know that many of you deal with this as well. GIS, teaching with any inquiry-based method, is it's a challenge to assess it with standardized tests, and that's always been the challenge of using anything like a GIS in a school. There are creative people like yourselves that are doing just that, but one of the things that's actually working in our favor is StoryMaps as assessment tools, because more and more schools and standards in states and even in whole countries are saying we want students to do these portfolio-based assessments, right? Or we want to assess students based on a portfolio of work that they've created. And this is not the only tool, I admit, but it is one way of creating that portfolio as they journey through their, for example, secondary curriculum. And then they have this portfolio that the instructor can assess in various ways with. And there are a couple of rubrics that I can share with Jake, that, for example, the University of Minnesota has created a rubric that many secondary educators use. You being the creative people that you are, you can create your own, but it's a nice example anyway. But by and large, these are not being used for rigorous assessment. We're certainly trying to nudge the needle, but they're more used for individual projects, either field-based or, like I referred to earlier, hey, we just had a 2 classroom unit on tsunamis of the Pacific. Please, class, create a story map with these 3 elements in it. You know, the tsunamis from 1900 to 2004, pick 2 that are of interest to you and write additional text on those 2 tsunamis and explain why they matter. It's those kinds of things that they're doing more of. But yeah, definitely, it's a viable component that is a pretty exciting development. It's just nice to have these web-based geospatial tools at our fingertips now, isn't it? And the way they all fit together, that really excites me.
Yeah, I think we mentioned this the other day in Brett's webinar actually. The reality is the curriculum's asking us as teachers to expose students to GIS technologies. So I guess that gives us a level of
Cool. That's great.
power as teachers. And if we do kind of jump on board and get a bit more comfortable with this technology, the curriculum bodies are going to have to kind of follow and say, well, we're asking for it. Guys are able to deliver it. So it's definitely heading that way. Another question from Debbie. You were briefly talking about, Joseph, you were briefly talking about Arcgis Online analysis tools. Debbie's asking, is there some kind of web page that gives a brief description and explanation of each of the tools and what they kind of do, what their function is?
Yes, I can share that with Jake.
Yeah, and I've made a note as well, Debbie,
Okay.
to get back to you too about that.
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked, because oftentimes educators think that either they're too difficult or the students can't do it. But I start with, again, like a lot of these things, start small. One of the tools, I'm sure Jake does this as well, it's your classic, if I drop a cup of water on the landscape at this location, where does it flow, right? So it's traced downstream. So you put a pin on the map let's say you're north of Melbourne. You know how the range is really close to the coast, but the rivers actually flow way up to the northeast before they circle way around, like in South Australia, and then back to the coast. In other words, they don't take the shortest path because there's a mountain range in between that location and the coast that's really close to the coast. So anyway, that trace downstream tool is just one example of the 40-ish tools that are in there that are really powerful because you're teaching about watersheds and elevation and so on. But it's it takes all of 1 minute to run, and overlaid on that, you can put the river systems and then the watershed boundaries. So again, it's there you go, sweet. Yep.
Yeah.
Drive times, yeah, very nice.
So like Joseph's mentioning, there's about 40, and there's definitely more that are relevant to teachers than right here, but you got to start somewhere, and these are some of perhaps the easier ones to get started with, as well as the ones that are, I guess, quite engaging as an analysis tool too. So there's some PD resources that are there available for you to explore if you want to have a look at some.
Mm-hmm. I mean, some of you that may be teaching in primary or upper primary, you may say, well, I'm never going to use drive time areas. But even a simple, hey, why isn't it perfectly circular, right? The 5, 10, 15-minute drive time from my school, why isn't it circular? And I think even those students will say eventually, well, because you can go faster on these major streets, and you can get farther in 5 minutes than you can going down these lightly trafficked service roads. Yeah, exactly. So you're teaching some spatial thinking there, even in that simple example. So yeah, thanks for asking about that. I love those analysis tools. I know that sounds geeky, but I really do.
Mm. I've got a couple more here. Good one about Survey 123. Once a survey's been published and you've perhaps already collected data, are you able to go back into the survey and edit it? And if so, does that affect existing data in any way?
Yeah, great question. So yes, you can go in and edit, but yes, your let's say you add a question. Obviously, that would not, the first 50 students that filled it out, they wouldn't have had that question, so that would be blank for all of that question. Answer would be blank for those first 50 surveys. But yeah, you can go in and edit it after the fact. And you can copy these surveys, you can modify the copy. They're really quite versatile. And I would just say, keep them pretty simple. But I know some educators that use them for attitudes also, not just collecting physical things on the ground. Put on the map 5 countries that you'd most like to visit. And then, in 15 minutes, the students do that in their class, and 15 minutes later, you've got a map. 10 minutes later, you've got a map, and okay, then symbolize it. What is the most popular country that your students would like to visit? Just stuff like that you can do right in the classroom with the same instrument. So in other words, you don't even have to go out on into the neighborhood, which might be
Yeah,
really good now if a lot of you are teaching online. So
absolutely. I think a great thing about Survey 123, if I can add my 2 cents, is that you don't have to have a question that puts it on the map necessarily. If you look at Year 8 geography, for instance, you look at changing populations and push and pull factors. Well, it might be really great to explore push and pull factors in your class and kind of look at where students or students' parents have come from, and maybe reasons that have pushed them from those countries or pulled them towards Australia, maybe even interstate migration. You don't necessarily need to add that mapping question to map the data. It could just be the great thing about Survey 123, and Joseph couldn't show us because there were no entries in it, but it spits out some graphs in bar, column, and pie graphs. So you can still get that data in a visual sense that can be used as a discussion tool in the classroom.
I love it.
Last question. and this is from I'm guessing from teachers that are just beginning. What is your biggest encouragement for teachers starting out with GIS?
Actually, Jake and I were talking about this before you all came on, and we're in agreement on this. That to start is important. It doesn't matter exactly where you start with this. Jake on the Esri Australia site, the Esri USA site, the Esri UK site, there's a variety of short one-page lessons that have you open a interactive web map in ArcGIS Online, for example. No login, no sign-in required. You don't even need to have an account. You just go to this lesson and you're teaching something that's in the educational content standards on energy, water, population change, etc. But that is oftentimes where educators start, is those one-page lessons, because then they see, oh, okay, I don't have to sign in. The bell's ringing in 5 minutes. I can use this for the next 20 minutes in class. The students are engaged, and also you're not confined to this a small map on page 50 of your textbook. You know what I mean? That's of ocean currents, and it's from 1980, and nothing against the 80s, but the point is you've got this interactive set of content at your fingertips about all of these topics that you can actually engage with. And a lot of educators, they'll start with those maps that are attached to the lessons, and they'll say, you know what, I don't even like those questions. I'm going to create my own questions. And that's perfectly fine too. But you've got the content tool, you've got the map with the layers in it, and many of those layers increasingly are real time or near real time. So you've got the level of water in the gauge downstream from your school, and you've got real-time weather, and you've got salinity of the ocean off of 100 kilometers off of Perth. I mean, you've got an amazing array increasingly from this Internet of Things and this sensor network. So that would be one way. I would just say, the key is to start somewhere and find a place in the curriculum where you're not completely happy with the existing resources that you have. That is oftentimes where educators start. Like, okay, I'm really not happy with this map or this resource, and I want to somehow use this in that way. And there are educators that Jake and I know that they only do this a couple times a semester, but that's okay. It's all about using the most appropriate tool for the job. And I'll just give you one more example. Sometimes people, when they know that I work for Esri, right, the educators will come up to me and say, Joseph, I'm using Google Earth for this lesson. And I say, great, fine. If it meets your needs, use it. So for example, if you're teaching about deforestation off of Madagascar, okay, and you're using Google Earth or Google Maps to look at the runoff from the streams because the streams are laden with sediment because many of the trees have been cut down. Great. If that's what you have time for in the curriculum, that would be a great tool. If you had, let's say, day 2 on that same lesson, then you could use ArcGIS Online and use, okay, now I've got 1970, 1990, and 2010 land cover for Madagascar, and I can have the students calculate how much of the country is covered by forests in each of those years, and therefore why there's so much sediment running off the land. See what I mean? So they're both good. It's not like one is better than the other. It's just, again, what's your level of the students? How much time do you have for that particular lesson? And then what tools would help you meet your goals?
Awesome. Well, thanks, Joseph, and thanks, folks. That is all we have time for today. We have gone a little bit over, so we do appreciate your time. For those that we said we would be in touch with, I'll make sure that I am. I've made a note to myself to make sure I reach out. In finishing, you'll be able to access a recording of the webinar most likely at the beginning of next week after it does undergo some quick edits. And if you do need to reach out to me, you can reach out to me at any time at education@esriaustralia.com.au. I'll be sure to get back. In fact, probably like Joseph, it's my most favorite part of the job, the engaging with teachers and classes and students. So yeah, don't ever hesitate to reach out. And lastly, again, a huge thank you to you, Joseph, for one, presenting to us, and two, for staying up super late over there in Denver, Colorado, so that you could present to us live. A huge thanks, really appreciate it.
Oh, I had a blast.
Otherwise, yes, yeah. I'll
Thanks
be
so
sure
much
to
for
vote for that
involving me.
again.
Map on. You folks take care.
Yes. That's it from us. Thank you everyone for joining us today and have a great evening. Catch you next time.